The world into which Alexander was born was one of conflict. Greece was divided, its city-states locked in endless rivalries, each seeking dominance. To the east, the mighty Persian Empire ruled over vast territories, its power stretching from the Mediterranean to India. But in the north, a kingdom once considered barbaric was rising: Macedonia, forged by war, strengthened by strategy. Philip had spent his life shaping Macedonia into a war machine. But war alone was not enough. He needed something greater. He needed a successor. Philip had done the unthinkable. He had unified Greece. He had forged alliances, crushed rebellions, and introduced a military system so effective that no European force could rival it. But unity was fragile. With his assassination, Greece was on the verge of collapse. Before he was a conqueror, before history whispered his name through the centuries, Alexander was a boy standing in the echoes of giants, staring at a destiny too vast to hold in his hands. Philip watches him with sharp eyes, measuring his son's potential.
Then King Philip said, "Macedonia is forged in war, Alexander. The world does not bow willingly. It must be made to kneel."
Alexander listens, but he is not only his father's son, he is also Aristotle's student.
Then Alexander remembered Aristotle's words, "A king must rule with wisdom. The sword may build empires, but only the mind can hold them together."
Alexander sits at a table lined with scrolls. His fingers trace words written centuries before philosophy, strategy, the art of persuasion. He reads Homer's Iliad obsessively, identifying with Achilles, the warrior who sought immortality through conquest. Trained in war, trained in thought, but destiny would demand something more: a sacrifice. Philip had ruled as a warrior king, but his death left his empire fractured. Rebellion sparked across Greece. His enemies saw an opening. Macedonia was vulnerable. Kings do not die in silence. Their deaths ripple through empires, leaving behind wars, betrayals, and a throne drenched in blood.
Some soldiers, doubtful and whispered, "Macedonia does not follow boys." Alexander, unwavering and firm, replied, "Then I will show them a king."
He did not beg for loyalty. He did not plead for trust. He answered Macedonia's doubt in the only language it understood. Alexander had silenced those who doubted him. He had crushed every rebellion that threatened his throne. But his ambition was greater than Macedonia. Greece had been united, but what lay beyond its borders? The vast empire of Persia. And Alexander had no intention of stopping. Some men rule kingdoms. Alexander would rule the world. Alexander had secured Macedonia. He had unified Greece. But his mind was set on something greater: the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful force the world had ever seen. For centuries, Persia had ruled unchallenged. But Alexander saw it not as an untouchable giant, but as his destiny. Some men dream of power. Alexander dreamed of eternity, and the path to eternity lay through Persia. But victory would not come easily. The Persian army outnumbered him 5-1. Its cavalry was unmatched, its wealth endless. To most, this war was madness. To Alexander, it was inevitable. Alexander stands alone, studying the map of the battlefield. His men wait outside, some sharpening their swords, others speaking in hushed tones, doubting whether they will survive the dawn. 5-1. Darius commands an army so vast that even the mightiest generals tremble at the thought of facing it. But Alexander knows something they do not.
Alexander thought to himself, "They have numbers, they have wealth, but they do not think as we do, they do not move as we do." Then the flap of the tent opens. Parmenion, one of Alexander's closest generals, steps in, his face lined with worry. Cautiously, he said, "If we attack at dawn, we may survive. But if we strike at night, we might die before the first blade is drawn." Alexander does not look away from the map. His voice is calm, measured. Then he said, "Victory does not belong to the cautious Parmenian. It belongs to those who shape fate before fate shapes them."
To hesitate is to fail. To retreat is to die. And Alexander had no intention of dying. Alexander, mounted on Bucephalus, his legendary warhorse, stares across the field. His army waits behind him, their breath slow, their grips tightening around their weapons. Then came Gaugamela's battle, where numbers meant nothing, where hesitation meant death, where fear had no place. Alexander weaves through the battlefield with precision, striking down enemies with ruthless efficiency. His army follows organized, disciplined, cutting through the Persian ranks like a storm. He does not fight like a man. He fights like something beyond mortal. Fearless, calculated, unstoppable. Darius turns. He flees. His men watch in shock as their king abandons them. Persia had ruled for centuries, but kings do not rule from the shadows, and Darius had already lost. Gaugamela was his greatest victory, but every victory comes at a cost. For the first time, the weight of war presses against him. He had conquered, he had won, but conquest demands sacrifice. The world would remember his triumph, but Alexander would remember his losses. With Persia's defeat, Alexander's path was clear. He would march into Babylon, take the throne, and reshape history. But something had changed. Victory was no longer just a goal, it was an obsession. He had conquered Greece. He had conquered Persia. But the fire inside him burned hotter than ever. And the world was not yet enough. Some men rule kingdoms. Alexander would rule the world. A king who conquered nations. A warrior who faced countless enemies. But his greatest battle was within himself. Alexander had done the impossible. He had crushed the mighty Persian Empire, taken Babylon, and expanded his reach beyond what even his father, Philip II, had envisioned. But with every victory came a cost not just in blood, but in loyalty. His men, who had followed him through endless campaigns, were growing weary. His closest companions had fallen. And now, deep in the heart of Bactria and India, whispers of rebellion began to spread. Alexander was no longer just a king. He was becoming something more, something divine, and the weight of his ambition was beginning to crack the foundation beneath him. Bactria was unlike anything Alexander had faced before. It was not just a battle, it was a war against an enemy who refused to be seen. The locals did not meet him in open combat. They struck from the shadows, vanishing into the mountains before his army could respond. For the first time in years, victory was not swift. It was slow, it was exhausting, and it was costing him everything.
Alexander, sitting by a fire, gripping a parchment map with shaking hands, his once loyal generals watch him cautiously, uncertain of his state of mind. Parmenian, speakshees, voice careful and measured. The men are tired, Alexander. They have marched thousands of miles. They ask, when will it end? Alexander does not look up. His fingers tighten around the parchment. Alexander thinks to himself, end. A dream does not end. A legend does not stop before it is written. He exhales, then stands. Alexander then, in a cold voice, commanded, "We move at first light. Those who wish to stop will not stand in my way." A soldier watching from the shadows. The seeds of rebellion have been planted. The thick, humid forests of India. Rain falls heavily. Mud coats the boots of Alexander's weary soldiers.
The campaign into India was brutal. The terrain was unforgiving. The heat suffocated even the strongest warriors, and then his army refused to march forward. They had followed him beyond the known world, but now they refused to follow him any further.
A war council. His generals stand in silence. A defiant soldier steps forward. The soldier then decided to say, "We do not fear battle, Alexander, but we are not gods. We are men, and we will not march beyond the edges of the world." Alexander's gaze is sharp. His chest rises with a slow breath. The silence stretches unbearably long. Then Alexander thought to himself, "Do they not see it? The dream? The legacy? Are they blind to what we have built?" But then, something flickers behind his eyes. Doubt. For the first time, he turns away.
Even the greatest warriors must face the weight of time, and time was running out. He had conquered the greatest empire the world had ever seen. He had marched farther than anyone before him. But now, he was alone. His men no longer worshipped him. They feared him, and fear does not last.
Alexander, staring into the flames, his face unreadable. He thinks to himself, was it worth it?
Alexander had risen beyond kings. He had shaped history itself. But history does not come without a price. And now, the cracks were showing. This was no longer a conquest. This was a reckoning. And the shadows of doubt were beginning to catch up to him. 32 years old, undefeated, untouchable, and yet a fever, a sickness, or something more sinister?
A messenger enters the chamber, cautiously stepping forward, and proceeded to say, "The people await your command, my king. What shall be the fate of the empire?" Alexander lifts his gaze's eyes distant, unfocused. For the first time, he does not answer. His generals enter the chamber: Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, Perdiccasman, who had followed him across thousands of miles, men who had watched him rise beyond kings. Now, they stand before him, uncertain.
The greatest ruler the world had ever known lay silent, and the empire he built trembled in his absence.
Alexander turns his head slightly, his lips part, but his voice barely rises. He said, "To the strongest." His final words, his last command, or the beginning of chaos.
He had forged the greatest empire known to man, but he had left behind no successor, and without him, the world unraveled. His generals dividing his lands, wars erupting between former allies, the dream of Alexander collapsing. Some men rule for a lifetime. Alexander ruled for eternity. His tactics studied by warriors for centuries. His story whispered through history. His name never forgotten. He did not just conquer lands, he conquered time itself.